This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Example, by Tom Pace. Malevolent death reared out of inky space before the hurtling liner. From it a frantic voice reached Commander Gray, "You know what to do." He smiled grimly. Yes, he knew what to do. The 5th Sector Commander was known as a rigid man, that was true, and yet no one could say exactly how rigid. His office, aboard the Polaris, was a rather grim place. All command offices were, essentially, being limited pretty much to regulation furnishings, but rare was the commander who did not manage to plant some of his personality there. It was perhaps characteristic of Commander Gray that there was only one item in his office which could be said to reveal anything about him. He sat now behind the cubicle steel desk and looked down at the glowing screen of the television set. The face in it was not at ease. Far from it. Ordinarily, John Bruller, the commissioner over Gray, was a self-important, unconsciously comical person. Now he looked neither comical nor important. He just looked very, very frightened. He licked his trembling lips and said, in a voice hoarse with fear, "Of course there is something you can do, Commander. After all," he brightened faintly, "there are important people on the Stella." Important people. He emphasized important. "I am aware of that, Commissioner Bruller," said the commander. "Yet, what can I do?" "You have authority," sputtered Bruller. "And you know what you can do? Get through to Interstellar Command on Sirius 7 and tell them just exactly what these Baelins are up to." He glared, a fat man in mortal fear for his life. "And you can do it quickly, Commander. Quickly, do you understand?" "I understand," the commander said. "Good." Bruller started to speak again, gulped, hesitated, and finally repeated, "Good." He switched off. The commander gazed reflectively down the catwalk, through the ship, at the faint glimmer of green outside of an open lock. There was a turbulence deep in his steel-colored eyes. He tapped a small stud with a slim, tapering forefinger. Keener Storn came in. Keener wasn't all Solarian. He had enough Sol blood in him to make him one in almost every respect, but there were differences, if you looked closely. He was the commander's personal aide. There was actually more than that between them. The tremendousness of all the commander governed, and which Keener helped him run, made for a rather involved relationship. When people saw the commander, they looked for Keener Storn. The two had not been 100 yards apart since they had first met as newly appointed official and aide. It was said that Keener knew every bit as much about the 5th Sector and the commander's work as the commander knew himself. For that reason, if Keener ever left his post, he would certainly die within an hour. The commander said, "Keener, call horns." The secretary showed no surprise, but somehow managed to give that impression. The city of Horns, capital of Baelin III, the ruling planet of the Baelin system. He asked very respectfully. "Yes. I want to talk to their commissioner-in-chief. And also find the present location of the Stella." "Yes, sir," said Keener. He came back within 10 seconds. "The Stella," he said, "is now at 3rd quadrant 3521 NAR, W88,236. Speed, 1 light-year per hour. Heading, 338 degrees NAV nearest sun, Baelin? And I have Baelin command for you." The commander touched a switch and the screen flicked on again. "Thank you, Keener," he said. The face in the screen was definitely not human. Its structure, and even more, its expression was alien. It was distinctly unpleasant. It belonged to Kruller, who was Commander-in-Chief, and the foremost murderer of the Baelin system. He smiled, A smile that was not a smile. He said, "Ah, Commander." And he saluted, sneering slightly. The commander said, "Greetings, Kruller. I would like to inquire the reason for your fleet being in its present position." Kruller smiled again. "The fleet, Commander. Merely maneuvers," he said slyly. "Why do you ask?" "There is a liner transiting through the outer fringes of your territory in," he looked at a paper Keener had slipped before him, "about 4 hours. I would appreciate it if your fleet is withdrawn in time. It would not go well, Kruller, if an accident were to happen to this liner of which I speak. I think you understand." He gave Kruller no time to answer, but switched off. He sat back, and looked aimlessly at Keener. "Keener," he said, after a few moments of thought. "Yes, Commander. Do you get the framework of this problem?" "I do, sir," answered the aide. "Good. Let me hear it." "The question is one of command," said Keener Storn quietly. "Out here in the stars, power, the authority to command, goes not to men's heads but to their souls. Kruller of Bielin is an example, and, in a different way." "Myself?" "No, Commander Bruller. He is the brass hat type, while Kruller is simply a tyrannical madman." "So far, you're right. But what of this particular problem?" "Yes, sir," the aide said. "Kruller, and the Bielin rulers, have power in and about their system to the extent that their depredations go unchallenged there. And an apathetic interstellar command does not act," finished the commander. "You are entirely correct, Keener." He touched studs on the desk and reports slid through the viewer on the wall. He said quietly, "We have lost a score of ships that we are sure the Bielins could tell us about. And yet the command does not act." He looked reflectively at the slim, impassive man, and then spoke swiftly. "Keener, I want you to get me 2 more connections, Sirius 7, and the command cruiser nearest to Bielin. Hurry." "The cruiser first?" A minute or so later, Keener slipped a sheet of paper onto the desk, and touched a switch. The screen glittered into life, showing the face of a man who wore a captain's shoulder bars. Glancing at the paper, which gave the name of the officer and the ship, the commander said, "Captain Stang, how far are you from Bielin?" "Roughly 20 light years, sir," was the immediate answer. "Do you think that you can make a speed of, say, 5 light years per hour, or perhaps more?" The captain frowned slightly. "I'm not sure, Commander. Perhaps we can." "Good. Stand by, at your present position in space." Gray switched off. Keener spoke softly at his side. "That one cruiser, Commander, is more than a match for the entire Bielin fleet." He paused. "Here's your call to Sirius headquarters, sir." "That one cruiser, Commander, is more than a match for the entire Bielin fleet." The commander turned back to the screen. "Over Commissioner Branyu, are you aware of the present stage of relations with Bielin?" The Overcommissioner frowned at him. "Certainly. Why are you asking, Commander?" There was an imperious sharpness in his voice. "What are they?" Branyu hesitated, said, "Relations are somewhat strained at present, of course, but not seriously." "I suppose proof was given that Bielin was back of the recent disappearances of spacecraft." "My dear Commander Gray, you must not say that. Such an intimation might easily cost you your post." "Why?" The commissioner cut him off. "You see, Commander," said Keener, "the command simply cannot think of such a thing." "Yes, but they could be made, forced, to think of it." "There is only one way to do that," said Keener. "Only one way?" "Yes." Commander Gray fell silent for a minute, and then said quietly, "Keener." "I am listening, sir." "The hands of one man," said the commander, "were never meant to hold personal power such as this. We can do only the best we can, and it will never be perfect. We must be prepared to," he hesitated slightly before going on to set aside all personal things, and substitute the stars for them. "Because only in that way can we approach perfection." Keener was silent and attentive, but his eyes flickered for a second across the one personal item in the office. "I am not a god, Keener. And yet I must be. Because there are men, such as Kruller, who think they are." He fell silent. Then he said, "A god must have power of life, and death." The screen was on again and, once more, it was Commissioner Bruller. He was almost frantic. "Commander Gray. Have you acted yet? The captain says that we are being screened out. Only this special set can get through, and only to you." He gulped, mopping at his forehead. "Commander, I have my entire family aboard this ship. I know that you—" His voice faltered for an instant. "Can't you get through to the command?" Then, nervously, without waiting for a reply, he plunged on. "The captain of the Stella says he believes there is an interstellar command cruiser within 4 hours or so. Can't you get it here? It could escort us through the edge of the Beelin system in safety. Commander Gray, I in?" The commander cut Bruller off. "Keener," he asked, "what do you think the effect of a Beelin massacre would be on the command?" "Roughly estimating, Commander, considerably more than the effect of an unleashed power beam on inert matter." "Yes," said the commander. "Yes. Keener, at least 10,000 human lives have been lost on ships that I know have been captured by the Beelins. Unless the command takes action, now, there will never be a check on Kruller and his successors. And only a shocking catastrophe would stir up the Sirius Command Headquarters. A certain kind of catastrophe." "The sacrifice justifies itself," said Keener Storn. "The moral laws, the very framework of civilization itself, is now of a shape incredible to the person of 200 or 300 years ago. My orders, then, should be—" Keener stood up, stiffly. "It would be presumptuous of me, Commander." The silence did not last very long. At last the commander said, "Keener, order Captain Stang to resume his usual patrol activities. Arrange to follow the Stella with a long-range recording beam. Prepare for the Interstellar Command's order, to proceed with a punitive expedition against the Beelin system." He looked long down the catwalk, and his fingers slowly closed about the one personal touch to his office. His voice was very low. "No more messages are to be received from the Stella." And he opened his hand. Later, after the commander had gone down the catwalk to walk about for a while on the soft, earth-like greenness of this world's vegetation, Keener bent to pick up that which had fallen to the floor. It was a color photograph, and the cold plastic sheen of the film somehow managed to convey the impression of the blonde, young woman's soft, warm loveliness. It was inscribed, "With all my love, John. Myra." Keener had often seen Commissioner Bruller's daughter. He dropped the photograph into a disposal chute, and turned to some papers that had to be filed. End of example, by Tom Pace.